A single dad who gave his only jacket to a stranger in the rain was unaware she was the billionaire heiress who would change his life forever. The final notice gives you precisely 72 hours, Mr. Thorne. The rain hammered down on the glass of the small apartment window like 1,000 desperate fists, relentless and wild. Inside, the world had shrunk to the size of a single, worn envelope held in Leo Thorne's trembling hand, the crisp paper feeling alien and cruel against his callous skin. He stared at the bold, red letters of the eviction notice, each word a separate, physical blow that seemed to echo the relentless pounding of the storm outside. The biting cold of the room, a familiar enemy that the small, sputtering radiator could never quite defeat, seeped deeper into his bones, a chilling mirror to the icy dread that had taken root in his heart. He was a good man. He had always tried to be a good man, a steady provider, a loving father. Yet, the world seemed to have a different plan for him, one written in the unforgiving ink of loss and hardship. First, the factory closure had stolen his job, the one he'd held for 15 steady years. Then, the universe had cruelly taken his wife, Elena, her laughter and warmth snatched away by an illness that had moved with the speed and devastation of a wildfire, leaving behind only the hollow echo of her memory and a mountain of medical debt. Now he was left with only two precious things. His 6-year-old daughter, Maya, who was sleeping soundly in the other room, her small face a picture of innocent trust, and a quiet, dignified desperation that felt heavier than any physical weight. He looked around the threadbare apartment, at the faded floral sofa and the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a sad, weeping map of some forgotten country. It wasn't much, but it was their home, their sanctuary against the harshness of the world. And now that too was being taken away. His heart thudded a slow, painful rhythm against his ribs. He felt shattered. A soft sound from the other room, the gentle creak of a bedspring, pulled him from his spiraling thoughts. He folded the notice with deliberate care, tucking it into the pocket of his worn jeans as if hiding the evidence of his failure. He moved towards Maya's room, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The door was slightly ajar, and a sliver of hallway light cut across the small space, illuminating his daughter. She was curled under a thin, patched quilt, her favorite teddy bear, Barnaby, clutched tightly to her chest. Barnaby was as worn as everything else they owned, with one button eye and stuffing peeking from a seam in his arm, a testament to years of love and comfort. Seeing her, so peaceful and unaware of the storm raging both outside and within her father's chest, caused a profound, almost unbearable ache to well up inside him. This was why he fought. This was why he couldn't give up. He had to be her rock, her unwavering shield, even if he felt like he was splintering apart. He closed the door with a soft click, plunging her room back into comforting darkness. He would not fail her. The next morning, the rain had subsided to a miserable drizzle, casting the city in a palette of gray and sorrow. Leo sat at the small kitchen table, nursing a cup of weak, lukewarm tea. He'd spent the entire night scouring online job boards, his eyes gritty from lack of sleep, applying for anything and everything: janitor, warehouse stalker, delivery driver. Rejection emails had already started to trickle in, each one a small, digital pinprick to his already wounded pride. Then he saw it. An ad that had been reposted several times, seemingly ignored by everyone else. Personal driver required for private residence. Discretion and reliability paramount. Unconventional hours. Demanding employer. Excellent compensation. The residence was listed as Blackwood Manor, a name that hung in the city's consciousness like a myth, a place of immense wealth and profound reclusion. The story said its owner, Alistair Blackwood, hadn't been seen in public for years, not since the tragic death of his wife. People called the job a ghost's post, driving a man who never went anywhere, for a family shrouded in grief. It was a job nobody wanted. It was perfect. With a surge of desperate hope, a fragile flicker in the vast darkness, he sent his application. He didn't know it yet, but this simple act of desperation was the first step on a path that would change everything. A response came within the hour. The interview was that afternoon. He was hired on the spot. The gates of Blackwood Manor were ornate and imposing, wrought iron titans that swung open with a sterile silence, as if swallowing his small, sputtering car into another world. The long, winding driveway was lined with ancient oak trees, their branches dripping with rain, standing like solemn sentinels guarding the secrets of the house. And the house itself. It wasn't a house, it was a fortress of grief, a stately Gothic structure of dark stone and ivy, with windows like vacant, haunted eyes staring out at the manicured but lifeless grounds. It was cavernous and cold, a polished marble mausoleum where silence was the most prominent resident. Leo's footsteps echoed unnervingly as he was led through the grand foyer by a woman who introduced herself simply as Alara. She was the estate manager, she explained, her voice as crisp and cool as the autumn air. She was tall and slender, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes the color of a stormy sea. There was a brittle efficiency about her, a wall of professional detachment that seemed as impenetrable as the manor's stone walls. She handed him a polished set of keys and a detailed, unforgiving schedule. His duties were simple. Be on call, maintain the fleet of sleek, black cars, and await instructions that might never come. His employer, Mr. Blackwood, did not leave the estate. Leo was to drive Alara on her errands and be ready at a moment's notice for the rare occasion a guest might arrive or depart. The pay was more than he had ever earned, a lifeline so substantial it felt unreal. He took the keys. He had a chance. For the first few weeks, the job was exactly as advertised. Long stretches of profound, echoing silence punctuated by brief, sterile instructions from Alara. He would sit for hours in the designated driver's lounge, a small, comfortable room that felt utterly disconnected from the rest of the opulent mansion. He would read old paperbacks he brought from home, think of Maya, and count the minutes until he could return to his own small, warm world. Alara remained a distant, commanding figure. She moved through the great house with a quiet purpose, her face an unreadable mask of cool competence. Yet, Leo, a man accustomed to observing the subtle shifts in the human heart, noticed the cracks in her facade. He saw the flicker of deep, unspoken sadness in her eyes when she thought no one was looking, the slight tremor in her hand as she held a porcelain teacup, the way she would sometimes stand before a large, dust-sheeted portrait in the main hall, her posture conveying a sense of loss so profound it seemed to suck the very air from the room. He saw a shared grief, a kinship of the shattered, but he kept his distance. He was the driver. She was the manager. Their worlds were separate. One afternoon, the sky, which had been a clear, brilliant blue, turned on a dime. A storm of biblical proportions descended upon the city, a sudden and violent onslaught of pounding rain and howling wind. Alara had an urgent errand in the city, a meeting with a team of lawyers, she'd said. Leo drove her in the stately, gleaming sedan, the wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. The meeting was in a polished, downtown skyscraper that seemed to pierce the angry clouds. He dropped her at the entrance, under the relative safety of an awning. "I will call you when the meeting is concluded, Mr. Thorne," she said, her tone formal. "It may be several hours," he nodded, watching her disappear into the building's revolving doors before pulling away to find a place to wait. He knew he was supposed to find a garage or a sheltered spot, but something made him park a block away, where he still had a clear view of the entrance. It was a protective instinct he couldn't explain. Hours passed. The storm only intensified. The streets began to flood, water pooling in great, dark sheets. The relentless hammering of the rain on the car roof was a deafening drumbeat. Leo watched the building, a thermos of hot, sweet tea he'd prepared that morning sitting untouched on the passenger seat. He'd packed it for himself, a small comfort for the long, cold wait ahead. Darkness fell, and the city lights blurred into a watercolor wash behind the rain-streaked glass. Then he saw her. The meeting was over, but something was wrong. Alara emerged from the building, but she didn't reach for her phone. She stood under the awning, looking small and fragile against the fury of the storm. She seemed to be searching for something, her gaze scanning the chaotic street. He saw her try her phone, a look of frustration crossing her face. The battery was likely dead. There were no taxis, and the street was a maelstrom of flashing headlights and splashing water. After a moment of visible hesitation, she pulled her thin coat tighter and stepped out from under the awning, into the full, brutal force of the downpour. She was walking. He didn't know why, perhaps her pride or a reluctance to appear helpless, but she was choosing to walk into the storm. In an instant, she was soaked, her dark hair plastered to her pale skin, her professional composure washed away by the sheer violence of the weather. She looked utterly lost, a solitary figure battling the elements. Her shoulders were hunched, and she was visibly trembling, not just from the biting cold, but from something deeper. In that moment, she wasn't the commanding estate manager. She was just a person, alone and vulnerable in a storm. Leo's heart clenched. He saw not an employer, but a fellow human being in distress. Without a second thought, his own quiet resolve took over. He started the car, its engine a low growl against the storm's roar, and pulled smoothly up beside her. The passenger window glided down with a soft whir. "Miss Alara," he said, his voice steady and calm. She gasped, startled, turning a pale, rain-streaked face towards him. Her eyes, usually so controlled, were wide and glistening with a raw, unspoken emotion. For a moment, she just stared, as if she couldn't quite process his presence. It was a moment of hesitation, her pride warring with her desperate need. "Get in," he said again, his tone gentle but firm, leaving no room for argument. She finally faltered, her brittle facade crumbling completely. She opened the door and slid into the warmth of the car, bringing the scent of rain and cold with her. She was shivering uncontrollably, her teeth chattering. Water dripped from her hair onto the plush leather seats. She said nothing, simply wrapping her arms around herself. Total silence filled the car, broken only by the storm and the rhythmic thump of the wipers. Leo turned up the heat, directing the vents towards her. Then, he did something that was far beyond the duties of a driver. He shrugged off his own jacket. It wasn't new or expensive, but it was thick, warm, and dry, his only truly decent piece of outerwear, and placed it gently over her trembling shoulders. She flinched at the contact, then relaxed into its unexpected warmth, a soft, shuddering sigh escaping her lips. He then reached for his thermos. He twisted the cap and poured the steaming, fragrant tea into the small plastic cup. He held it out to her. "Here," he said. "It will help." She looked from the cup to his face, her stormy eyes searching his. She saw no pity, no expectation, only sincere, selfless concern. It was a look she hadn't seen directed at her in a very, very long time. Her hand was shaking so much she could barely take the cup. He steadied it for her, his large, rough hand covering her small, cold one for a brief electric moment. The warmth of the cup seeped into her skin. The act was so simple, so profoundly kind and unsolicited, that it seemed to strike a deep, resonant chord within her. She took a sip of the sweet, hot tea, and a single tear traced a path through the raindrops on her cheek. It was a gesture of pure, human decency, offered at his own expense, without any expectation of reward. He didn't know it, but for Alara Blackwood, the secretly grieving billionaire heiress who lived in a gilded cage of wealth and loneliness, this small act of kindness was a seismic event. It was a flicker of light in her own personal darkness, a moment that would reawaken her heart and give her a new, undeniable purpose. She looked at this quiet, dignified man, who now sat in his shirt sleeves, and felt a profound, cathartic shift inside her. The silence deepened. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, cracked with an emotion she couldn't name. He just nodded, his eyes on the road. He was gone. The consequences of Leo's kindness were swift and unforgiving. The long hours spent in damp clothes, chilled to the bone after giving away his jacket, settled deep in his lungs. By the next morning, he was shivering not from cold but from a raging fever. His body ached, and a harsh, rattling cough racked his frame. He couldn't go to work. The thought of losing this job, his only lifeline, was a new kind of terror. He called the manor, his voice a hoarse whisper, and left a message with the household staff, explaining he was ill. He spent the day in a feverish haze, drifting in and out of a restless sleep, Maya trying her best to care for him, bringing him a glass of water with her small, solemn hands. His worry was a physical weight, pressing down on his already aching chest. The next day, feeling only marginally better but driven by fear, he forced himself to check the mail. Taped to his door was another envelope from the landlord. It wasn't a notice. It was a summons. The 72 hours were up. The eviction process had officially begun. The world tilted on its axis. His one act of compassion had potentially cost him his health, his job, and now his home. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over him. He sank onto the top step of the worn staircase in the hallway, the summons clutched in his hand, his head in his hands. He had tried so hard, and it was all for nothing. He felt utterly and completely shattered. Meanwhile, at Blackwood Manor, Alara was experiencing a different kind of turmoil. The warmth of the jacket, the memory of the hot tea, the simple, steady kindness in Leo Thorne's eyes. It had unsettled her, breaking through years of carefully constructed emotional armor. She had returned to the sterile silence of the mansion feeling different, changed. For the first time since her mother's death, she felt a flicker of something other than grief or duty. It was a strange, unfamiliar warmth, a sense of connection to another human being that she hadn't realized she was starving for. She had his jacket, a tangible symbol of his selflessness, draped over a chair in her private study. The faint, clean scent of it was a stark contrast to the dust and sorrow that usually filled the air. When he didn't show up for work, a sliver of concern, sharp and unexpected, pierced her composure. She inquired with the staff and learned he had called in sick. An immediate, protective instinct surged within her. She connected his illness with his generosity in the storm. He had gotten sick because of her. The realization landed with the force of a physical blow. This good, decent man was suffering because he had helped her. It was unacceptable. This was the catalyst. Her grief had made her passive, a ghost in her own home. But this injustice, this imbalance in the moral fabric of the world, reawakened the formidable woman who lay dormant beneath the layers of sorrow. Her father had built an empire on decisive action, and she was, after all, his daughter. Her purpose, once clouded by loss, was now crystal clear. She would not just repay this man. She would protect him. She would use the immense power and wealth at her disposal, tools she had long regarded as a burden, to restore the balance. Sitting at her father's immense mahogany desk, she became a quiet force of nature. A few discreet phone calls to her family's private investigation firm were all it took. Within an hour, she had a complete, confidential file on Leo Thorne on her encrypted laptop. She read about the loss of his wife, his unjust firing, his mounting debts, and the imminent eviction. Each new detail of his quiet, dignified struggle was like a turn of a key, unlocking a fierce, protective resolve within her. Her hollow ache of grief began to transform into a powerful engine of purpose. She saw his purity, his unwavering goodness in a transactional world that had given him nothing but pain. He had offered her his jacket. She would offer him a fortress. The first step was to solve his most immediate problem, but it had to be done anonymously. He was a man of immense pride. A direct handout would only wound him. She made another call, this one to her personal banker. With a few quiet, commanding words, she arranged for an anonymous wire transfer to his landlord's holding company, covering not just the back rent, but the next 6 months. The eviction was canceled before Leo even knew it. Next, she addressed his family's more immediate needs. She contacted a high-end organic grocery service and arranged for a massive, unmarked delivery of food, fresh fruits, vegetables, quality meats, pantry staples, enough to last for weeks. Tucked inside one of the bags was a gift certificate to a children's clothing store. Finally, she purchased the warmest, most beautifully made winter coat for a 6-year-old girl she could find online, along with a new plush teddy bear, a perfect twin to the worn one she had seen in a photo of Maya in the file. She had it all boxed and delivered by a courier with a simple and signed note attached. From a friend who believes in kindness. Stay warm. She watched the courier's progress on a map on her screen, her heart pounding with a strange mix of anxiety and exhilaration. She was no longer just observing the world from behind a wall of grief. She was actively shaping it, weaving a net of safety around this man and his daughter, all from the sterile silence of her father's study. It was a beginning. Leo returned from a desperate, fruitless walk to the legal aid office to find a stack of boxes outside his apartment door. His first thought was a mistake, a delivery for the wrong address. Then he saw the note. From a friend who believes in kindness. His brow furrowed in confusion. He had no friends with this kind of money. Cautiously, he brought the boxes inside. As he and Maya unpacked them, his confusion turned to stunned disbelief. The sheer quantity and quality of the food was overwhelming. It was more than they had seen in months. Then Maya pulled the new coat from the box, a beautiful, deep blue parka that felt impossibly soft and warm. Her eyes, wide and luminous, filled with a wonder that brought a lump to Leo's throat. And then she saw the bear. It was a perfect, brand new Barnaby. She gasped, a sharp, delighted sound, and hugged it tightly. "Daddy, look, Barnaby has a brother," she squealed with pure, innocent joy. Leo watched her, a storm of emotions warring inside him. Gratitude, confusion, and a profound sense of being seen by some unknown, benevolent force. Later that day, a letter arrived. It was from his landlord. He opened it with trembling fingers, expecting the worst. But the letter stated that his account had been paid in full, with a significant credit remaining. His lease was secure. Leo sat down heavily on his worn sofa, the letter shaking in his hand. He didn't understand. It felt like a miracle, a ray of golden glow breaking through the heaviest fog. He didn't know who was responsible, but for the first time in a very long time, he felt a flicker of hope. He could breathe. He and Maya would be okay. He had no idea that the quiet, reserved woman to whom he had given his jacket was the architect of his salvation, watching over him from a distance, her own profound healing beginning with these secret acts of kindness. When Leo was finally well enough to return to work, the world felt different. The crushing weight of desperation had been lifted, replaced by a quiet sense of wonder and a deep, humbling gratitude. He walked through the imposing gates of Blackwood Manor not as a man on the brink, but as someone who had been touched by grace. He felt an inexplicable pull to speak with Alara, to thank her for, he wasn't sure what, for her concern, perhaps, for the job that had, in some indirect way, led to this miraculous turn of events. He found her in the cavernous kitchen, a sterile expanse of stainless steel and polished marble where the mansion's private chef prepared their solitary meals. She was standing by a large window, staring out at the rain-slicked gardens, a porcelain cup of tea held in her hands. The amber hue of the morning light softened the severe lines of her face, revealing the deep-seated weariness she usually kept so well hidden. "Miss Alara," he began, his voice soft, not wanting to startle her. She turned, her expression unreadable, but he thought he saw a flicker of something, relief, perhaps, in her stormy eyes. "Mr. Thorne, you have recovered," she stated, her voice even and crisp as always. "I have. Thank you," he said. He paused, searching for the right words. Some incredible things have happened. My situation has changed, dramatically. I don't know how, but I feel I have this job to thank for it." He felt foolish saying it, but he had to say something. Alara's gaze was steady, unwavering. She simply nodded, taking a slow sip of her tea. "Good things happen to good people, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice quiet. The simplicity of her statement, delivered with such sincere gravity, created a space for something more. It was an opening. The air in the vast, silent kitchen seemed to warm slightly, charged with an unspoken understanding. This was the beginning of their confession scene. She gestured to the chair opposite her at the large steel island. "Please," she said. It was not an order, but a gentle invitation. He sat, his work-roughened hands resting on the cold surface. For a long moment, they sat in a comfortable silence, the only sound the soft hush of the ventilation system. Then, compelled by the sense of safety she projected, Leo began to speak. He told her about Elena, about her vibrant spirit and the laughter that used to fill their small apartment. He spoke of the brutal swiftness of her illness, the hollow space she had left behind, and the daily struggle to be both mother and father to Maya. He confessed his fear, the constant, gnawing terror of failing his daughter, of not being enough. He didn't pour out a torrent of emotion, but spoke in a quiet, dignified tone, the raw pain shimmering just beneath the surface of his steady words. Alara listened. She didn't offer empty platitudes or trite expressions of sympathy. She just listened, her eyes never leaving his face. It was a profound gift, the feeling of being truly seen, of having his burden witnessed without judgment. It was more comforting than any words could have been. When he finished, his voice thick with unspoken grief, she didn't speak immediately. She rose, moved to the counter, and prepared another cup of tea, her movements fluid and deliberate. She placed the steaming cup in front of him, a simple, empathetic gesture that spoke volumes. Then, she returned to her seat and, for the first time, she let her own walls crumble. "My mother," she began, her voice a little less crisp, a little more fragile, "loved these gardens. She planted every rosebush herself. She looked out the window, her gaze distant. She died 2 years ago. It was sudden. A heart condition we never knew she had." She paused, her throat working. "My father," he retreated into himself, "into this house. He hasn't left since the funeral. He exists, but he doesn't live. And I became the manager of this mausoleum. I kept everything running, perfectly sterile, perfectly silent, because it was easier than feeling the silence inside myself." She looked at Leo, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "The day of the storm, I had just come from a meeting with the lawyers who were still trying to untangle her estate. It was her birthday, the confession hung in the air between them, a sacred, shared truth. He finally understood the profound sadness he had seen in her, the source of the brittle armor she wore. They were two sides of the same coin, both haunted by loss, both trying to navigate a world that had been rendered colorless by grief. "I'm so sorry," he said, the words feeling small but carrying the weight of his genuine empathy. She gave him a small, sad smile. "You showed me a kindness that day, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice soft. "A simple, human kindness. It was the first time I felt anything other than this heavy fog in a very long time. It reminded me that there was still goodness in the world." He felt a powerful, undeniable connection to this woman, a bond forged in the crucible of their shared tragedies. He reached across the table, his hand hesitating for a moment before he gently placed it over hers. It was not a romantic gesture, but one of profound, human solidarity, a tender acknowledgement of their shared scars. Her fingers curled slightly, accepting the contact. In the sterile silence of the grand kitchen, two lonely, shattered souls had found a quiet harbor in each other. The opportunity for their fragile bond to be tested arrived unexpectedly, cloaked in the guise of a prestigious charity gala held at a museum adjacent to the city's most elite private school, Northwood Preparatory. It was the school Maya had briefly attended on a scholarship before Leo lost his job and could no longer afford the supplemental fees, forcing him to withdraw her. Alara was a major patron of the museum and was expected to make an appearance. "I require a driver for this evening, Mr. Thorne," she had said, her tone professional, but with an undercurrent of their newfound warmth. "Of course," Leo had replied. When he arrived to pick her up, she was transformed. She wore a simple but impeccably tailored gown of deep emerald silk, her hair styled in soft waves. The severe mask of the estate manager was gone, replaced by a quiet, commanding elegance. But as he drove, he felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. The venue was a place of immense wealth and privilege, a world he no longer belonged to, if he ever had. The plan was for him to wait in the car, but as they arrived, Alara turned to him. "It will be a long evening. Please come inside. The staff has a reception area. You'll be more comfortable." He hesitated, but she insisted with a gentle, unwavering look. He found himself in a large, ornate hall designated for drivers and personal staff, a world away from the glittering ballroom but still within the orbit of the elite. He kept to himself, nursing a cup of coffee, feeling deeply out of place in his simple black suit. That's when he saw her, Mrs. Gable, the headmistress of Northwood Preparatory. She was a woman carved from ice, with a smile that never reached her cold, calculating eyes. She was speaking with another couple, her voice carrying across the polished marble floor. Her eyes scanned the room and then they landed on Leo. A flicker of cruel recognition dawned on her face. She excused herself from her conversation and glided towards him, her expression a mask of condescending pity. This was the moment of public humiliation. "Mr. Thorne, isn't it?" she began, her voice loud enough for those nearby to turn and listen. "I almost didn't recognize you out of your work clothes, though I suppose this is a uniform of a sort, too." The barb landed, sharp and stinging. Leo felt a hot flush of shame creep up his neck, but he held her gaze, his expression quiet and dignified. "Mrs. Gable," he acknowledged calmly. "I didn't realize you were still in arrears," she continued, her voice dripping with faux concern that was really just a vehicle for cruelty. $2,700 for your daughter's tuition and fees. A significant sum. We had to write it off as a loss. It's such a shame when people try to live beyond their means. Maya was a sweet girl, but Northwood is for families who can contribute to our community. The surrounding staff members were now openly staring, some with pity, others with a detached curiosity. Leo felt their eyes on him like a physical weight. He was being stripped bare, his poverty and his failure as a provider laid out for public display. He stood there, overwhelmed but unflinching, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. He would not give this woman the satisfaction of seeing him break. He was a father. He was a man of dignity. Just as Mrs. Gable was about to deliver another verbal blow, a voice, calm but carrying an undeniable authority, cut through the tense atmosphere. "I believe you are mistaken, Mrs. Gable." The dramatic entrance was made. Alara stood there, a vision of commanding grace in her emerald gown. She had appeared as if from nowhere, moving with a silent, powerful purpose. Every eye in the room swiveled to her. A soft gasp went through the small crowd as they recognized Alara Blackwood, the city's most enigmatic and powerful heiress. Mrs. Gable froze, her mouth slightly agape, the color draining from her face. Miss Blackwood," she stammered. Alara's gaze was like chips of ice. She moved to stand beside Leo, a subtle but clear gesture of allegiance. "Mr. Thorne is not in arrears," Alara said, her voice level but ringing with power, "because I personally settled his account last week." In full, she paused, letting the statement land. "Furthermore, I was so moved by his story of integrity and his dedication to his daughter, a dedication you clearly neither understand nor value, that I have instructed my financial advisors to establish the Elena Thorne Scholarship Fund at your school. It is an endowment of $10 million, specifically for single parents facing financial hardship." A collective, sharp gasp echoed through the hall. Mrs. Gable looked as though she had been struck by lightning. Alara wasn't finished. She turned her unwavering gaze from the headmistress to Leo, her expression softening into something warm and protective. "And for the record," she announced, her voice resonating with absolute authority, "Mr. Thorne is not merely my driver. As of this evening, he is my new head of personal logistics and security. A position that comes with a salary that will ensure his daughter will want for nothing ever again." She had completely reversed the power dynamic. She had not only defended him, she had elevated him, publicly bestowing upon him status and security. She had performed a heroic public salvation, leaving his tormentor speechless and utterly humiliated. Alara placed a gentle hand on Leo's arm. "Shall we go, Leo?" she asked softly, using his first name for the first time. He could only nod, his heart pounding a wild, cathartic rhythm in his chest. He was in a state of profound disbelief. He followed her as she swept out of the hall, leaving a trail of stunned silence and a thoroughly vanquished antagonist in her wake. The drive back to the manor was a blur of shimmering city lights and unspoken emotions. The gleaming sedan, once a symbol of the chasm between their worlds, now felt like a private, intimate sanctuary. The air inside was thick with the aftermath of the confrontation, a mixture of shock, relief, and a powerful, undeniable tenderness. Leo's hands were steady on the wheel, but his mind was reeling. He kept replaying the scene in his head. Alara's commanding presence, the steely power in her voice, the way she had stood by him, a fierce and unwavering guardian. She had not just saved him from humiliation. She had validated his worth in front of the very people who looked down on him. When they arrived, he pulled the car to a stop before the grand entrance but didn't move to get out. He turned in his seat to face her. The dim light from the dashboard cast her face in soft shadows, her stormy eyes glistening with an emotion he couldn't quite decipher. "Alara," he said, the name feeling both new and perfectly natural on his lips. "Everything, the rent, the food, the coat for Maya. That was you. All of it, it wasn't a question." He knew. He saw the truth in the gentle, almost shy, dip of her head. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why?" he asked, his own voice thick with emotion. "You barely knew me." She met his gaze, and the last of her defenses seemed to melt away, leaving only raw, beautiful vulnerability. "I told you," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You showed me a kindness I thought no longer existed. You gave me your jacket in the middle of a storm, expecting nothing in return. You sat in the cold so I could be warm. In my world, Leo, everything is a transaction. Every gesture has a motive. People are kind to me because of my name, because of what they think they can get from me. But your kindness was pure. It was selfless." She reached out, her hand hovering for a moment before she gently touched his cheek. His skin was warm beneath her cool fingers. "You woke me up," she continued, a tear finally tracing a silver path down her cheek. "I was living in a gray, silent world, just going through the motions of being alive. Your simple, decent heart was like the sun breaking through the fog. Helping you and Maya, it was the first thing that made me feel alive again since my mother died. It wasn't charity, Leo. It was self-preservation. You saved me, just as much as I saved you." His heart felt as though it might burst. The sheer, breathtaking scope of what she had done for him, and the profound, deeply personal reason behind it, was almost too much to comprehend. He covered her hand with his own, pressing it against his cheek. The unspoken feelings that had been simmering between them for weeks finally rose to the surface, undeniable and overwhelming. He leaned in, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. She met him halfway, her eyes fluttering closed. Their first kiss was not a fiery explosion, but a quiet, tender collision of two souls who had found their missing pieces in the most unexpected of places. It was a kiss that tasted of rain and relief, of shared grief and newfound hope. It was a promise of a new beginning, a sacred vow made in the silent sanctuary of the night. When they finally broke apart, they rested their foreheads together, breathing the same air. "I don't know what to say," he murmured, his voice husky. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered back. "Just let me take care of you. Let me and Maya be your family now." He looked into her eyes, and in their depths, he saw not a billionaire heiress or a commanding employer, but the woman who had shared her deepest pain with him in a sterile kitchen, the woman who had trembled in the cold, the woman who had seen the goodness in him when he could no longer see it in himself. "Yes," he said, the single word filled with all the hope and love in his heart. The resolution was complete. The Savior had not only solved all his problems but had offered him the one thing money could never buy, a home in her heart. 1 year later, the golden glow of a late afternoon sun streamed through the large bay windows of a cheerful, light-filled home. This was not the cold, cavernous manor, but a house filled with warmth, laughter, and the scent of baking cookies. The heavy, ornate furniture of Blackwood Manor had been replaced with comfortable sofas, shelves overflowing with books, and walls covered in Maya's colorful, happy drawings. Leo stood by the window, watching Alara and Maya in the sun-drenched garden. Maya, now 7 years old and thriving, her cheeks rosy with health and happiness, was chasing butterflies with a small net, her joyous squeals echoing in the peaceful air. Alara, dressed in simple jeans and a soft sweater, her hair free from its severe bun and tumbling over her shoulders, was on her knees in the flower bed, tending to a patch of vibrant red roses, her mother's favorite. She looked up and caught Leo's eye, a radiant, unguarded smile lighting up her entire face. It was a smile he now saw every day, a smile that had completely erased the haunted, weary look she once wore. He smiled back, his heart full to bursting. The past year had been a whirlwind of beautiful changes. He was no longer just an employee but Alara's true partner. In business and in life, he managed the Blackwood Foundation's charitable endeavors, using his innate decency and first-hand understanding of hardship to direct their immense resources to where they were needed most. He had found a purpose that went beyond mere survival. He was making a difference. Maya adored Alara, and Alara, in turn, showered her with a gentle, steady love that had healed the parts of her heart that had missed a mother's touch. They were a family, a real, loving, and profoundly happy family, built not on a foundation of wealth, but on a single, selfless act of kindness performed on a rainy night. He watched as Maya abandoned her butterfly hunt and ran to Alara, throwing her small arms around her neck. Alara hugged her back tightly, burying her face in Maya's hair. This idyllic scene, this perfect, peaceful life, was his reality now. The threadbare apartment, the eviction notices, the hollow ache of desperation. They all felt like a lifetime ago, a bad dream from which he had finally, miraculously, awoken. He stepped out into the garden, the warm sun on his face, and wrapped his arms around both of them, his two girls. This was his happily ever after. This story serves as a powerful testament to the idea that a single act of selfless kindness can create ripples that change the very course of a life. It is a fable for our times, reminding us that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in the compassion we show to one another. Leo, a man with nothing, gave everything he had, his warmth, his comfort, and in doing so, unlocked a future of unimaginable love and security. Alara, a woman with everything, was empty until she learned to use her resources not for power, but for healing, beginning with the healing of one good man's broken world. Their journey is a universal story of redemption, proving that even in the deepest shadows of grief and hardship, the light of human decency can spark a love that makes all things new. If this story touched your heart and reaffirmed your faith in the power of goodness, please let us know. These tales are meant to be a beacon of hope in a world that can often feel dark, a reminder that miracles can be found in the simplest of gestures and that love is the most powerful force for change. We believe that stories like Leo and Alara's are not just fiction. They are a reflection of the best parts of our shared humanity, and we are honored to share them with you. To ensure you don't miss out on more soul-stirring and heartwarming stories that celebrate the triumph of the human spirit, please like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales. Your support allows us to continue creating inspiring content that proves kindness is never, ever wasted. We'll see you in the next one.